by SGR Knowledge Foundation in association with GH Raisoni University, powered by Raisoni Group of Institutions. I am Aditi Batra, delighted to be your anchor for today's session. We weren't lovers like that by Mr. Navtej Sarna in conversation with Professor Pushpinder Syal ma'am. Navtej Sarna sir is the author of the novels The Exile and We Weren't Lovers Like That and the short story collection Winter Evenings. His non-fictional works include the Book of Nanak, Second Thoughts, and Indians at Herod's Gate, as well as two translations, Zafarnama and Savage Harvest. As a professional diplomat, he has served as as, as High Commissioner of India to UK, Ambassador of India to Israel, and most recently as India's Ambassador to the United States. It's an honor to have you with us, Mr. Navtej Sarna, sir. And this gets even more delightful as we have Professor Pushpinder Syal ma'am, who will be in conversation with him as the moderator. Pushpinder Syal ma'am holds a PhD from Lancaster University, United Kingdom, is the professor and chairperson, Department of English and Cultural Studies, Punjab University, Chandigarh, where she has been teaching since 1978. She was also the director at Lucknow campus of English and Foreign Language University in 2010 and 11. She has worked and guided extensive research in the field of stylistics, language teaching, and literature, and has several publications in these areas. Chiefly Structure and Style is Commonwealth Literature, Vikas 1994. An Introduction to Linguistics, Grammar and Semantics, Prentice Hall 1997, and was guest editor of Language and Language Teaching 13, and contributor to Journals of Language and Linguistics. In literature, she has taught and researched in African, Australian, and Indian writings. She has been associated with several projects with the British Council, CBSE, NCRT, IGNOU, etc., being deeply involved in teacher education and evaluation, and her current interests have expanded to translation, Sikh studies, and literature in Punjab. She lives in Chandigarh and does organic farming and voluntary service for animals. I once again welcome you, Navtej sir, and I would welcome you, Pushpinder ma'am. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without skipping a moment, I humbly invite Professor Pushpinder Syal ma'am to lead us ahead.
Thank you, Aditi. And thank you to the organizers of the Orange County Literature Festival. It's nice to think of oranges in this weather and Orange Country. Thank you very much, and it's lovely to meet Mr. Navtej Sarna this morning and have a chat about very interesting work. So if you like, we can start, sir, Navtej.
Sure.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Right. So I was when we begin to talk about this novel, We Were Not Lovers Like That. What came to my mind was Faiz Ahmad Faiz and Mujhse Pehli Si Muhabbat Mere Mehboob Na Mang. Now, what is this Pehli Si Muhabbat? And how does this novel, or this story, deal with that Pehli Si Muhabbat? What is the notion of love and romance and the recovery of love? What does this novel, what does this mean? We were not lovers like that. Like what? So the statement, we were not lovers like that, so is intriguing. So I'd like you to start perhaps from there, that how are these lovers different? How is this love story different like that? So perhaps you can tell us something about that idea of love.
Well, thank you, Pushpinder, and thanks to Orange City Literature Festival, that a novel which came out in 2003 is 18 years old, is getting interest and allowing me to go back to it. It's a privilege to know that the novel is still in print, and that it is worthy of a serious discussion like this. It has enabled me actually to reread my own novel, because, you know, as writers move on, and sort of you go on to other books and you tend to forget. And so it's been a privilege, actually been a great thing to just revisit this novel. I think you've touched on several points in your first question, and very, very perceptive points. Uh, and I think you're right in evoking Faiz, who's Faiz Saab is one of my favorites also. So I think that sort of fits in. Uh, we weren't lovers like that actually is a line which, you know, when I was searching for the title of the book, it came very clearly to me, because I'm a fan of Leonard Cohen, and this is a Leonard Cohen line. And actually, he says in his song "Sisters of Mercy" that, you know, it won't make me jealous if I know that this sweetened your night. We weren't lovers like that, and besides, it would still be all right. So that's the kind of a whimsical sort of view of love that's also undertaken in this book. In this book in particular, I think the title resonates through the book in different ways, but I think the immediate focus is where that line actually occurs in the book, is when the protagonist and is meets this girl in Bombay. I still call it Bombay because the city I've written about is the Bombay. And the girl that he meets, and then the relationship that develops is a very there's a kind of unwritten or unspoken pact in that relationship, and that is that, you know, he says enough people love seriously and soberly. We weren't going to be lovers like that. And it is a relationship and conversations that's packed, light-hearted banter. Uh, it's kind as if both of them are treading on very thin ice, in a way that they don't want to expose themselves to a situation where they might get hurt or they might hurt each other. And in that sense, so he says that we were supposed to care and not show it. So that's the kind of thing that, you know, right through so when the relationship doesn't work out, um, you know, she pretends that it doesn't matter. Uh, and he also moves on, but it does matter hugely to both of them. So again, when you say "Mujhse pehli si mohabbat mere mehboob na maang," you know, in that is a slightly different thing in the sense that don't expect me to love you like I used to, because I have now moved on, not vis-a-vis you, but about the concerns,
Yes.
you know, और भी दुख हैं जमाने में
Yeah.
मोहब्बत के
Yeah.
सिवा राहतें और भी हैं वसल
Yeah.
की राहत के सिवा, in the sense that there are other concerns which have taken priority over my love. So I can't love you the same way as I used to, because when I was obsessed only with love, but now have problems of the world to look at. So here, in many ways, you know, that pehli si mohabbat remains intact. Perhaps because it never gets fulfilled. Perhaps because it never gets impacted with real world problems. So it becomes a kind of idealized mohabbat, which lives in his mind, lives in his consciousness, and perhaps lives in hers too. And you know, and so that's perhaps the roughest analogies that I can give to you on
Yes.
this.
Yes. Yes, it certainly is different. But, you know, it's also to do with time and the past, and whether it is recoverable or not. I mean, according to Shakespeare, love doesn't change, and that it stays constant and steadfast, as Shakespeare wrote in his sonnets. what do we have here? I mean, I wanted to kind of look at the first line in the novel, in which he says that I've always been running away from things. So as the novel progresses, one wonders whether he's running away or he's running towards something, because time comes into the picture. Time is uh, intertwined with the idea of the romance as it was in the past, and as it could be in the present, as it is in the present, and it could be later on. So, of course, I mean, you have dealt with time in this manner, you know, with frequent shifts between the past and the present. So, do you think it is running towards something? Is there hope? Is there
Well,
hope for?
it's a journey. It's a journey, and
Mm,
it's physically a journey and metaphorically a journey. It's a
mm,
physically a journey because the structure of the book is a train journey from Delhi to Dehradun, and it's just a 5 hour, 6 hour journey. But in those 5 and 6 hours, you see everything that's happened to your protagonist in his from his childhood to his youth to his present.
mm,
So in many ways, at one level, he is running away. He's running away from a destroyed marriage. He's running away from heartbreak. He's running away from failure in his job. He's running away from a deep sense of alienation in the way the city of Delhi, his professional life, people dealing with each other. He's out of sync with the way things are. And as the journey progresses, it seems all the time that he's running away, and he has been running away from situations. That's the
mm,
kind of character he is. So
yes.
he has been running away from, he's taken the back seat, he's let things, take their way rather than grabbing them by the horns. But
Mm,
as the book reaches towards its final stages, you see that the journey becomes towards something. He's going. It becomes from a journey of desolation and despair. It begins to become a journey of light and hope. And then he's reliving his childhood memories, and and then we discover that his lost love may still be within grasp, and it may still be possible. Although time would have,
mm,
as you rightly said, whether that love stays intact and stays in the same form through the passage of time is something which only people who are there will be able to tell you. Or,
mm,
he will discover when he actually meets her. So,
mm.
in that sense, it's left a bit of a question mark in the end,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
sort of deliberately so.
Yes, yes. It's quite okay to remain with a question mark, because it leaves room for the imagination
Mm,
to visualize and to hope, which is the essence actually of a good love story.
mm,
And talking about the character, I think that this character is very much in the tradition of some of these well-educated English-speaking men who, in Indian fiction, we find these characters who, are alienated and even self-alienated, not only from their society, but from an environment, but also within themselves. And, there have been writers like Arun Joshi and Upmanyu Chatterjee who have portrayed such characters. Again, you see, somewhat at odds with um, their environment and their society and with people around them, and angst-ridden existentialist. There was a time when existentialist characters were very much in vogue. But I would also like to comment that perhaps this character is also a little different from them, because though, I mean, he's contemplative, he is alienated, but he is contemplating. And of course, that kind of contemplation has been also called navel gazing, too withdrawn, too much within oneself. But what I find amazing is how much of an inner space he does traverse while just sitting on that train seat. And that how many dimensions we are able to see just of this, person who is physically kind of static, but whose mind goes through all the events of his life, and more endearing, if you agree, than some of those alienated characters, because we do see those flashes of compassion, of understanding, not only in the case of his earlier love, but also towards his secretary and towards his son. So we do get a multidimensional picture. Um, am I right in interpreting the character in this way?
Yes, I think you are. You have actually analyzed it better than I could have analyzed him. But he's, but that's what happens. Uh,
Mm,
we, I suppose, when people write, they write out of their subconscious. They're not
mm,
actually planning a character in the way that you have been able to piece him apart. But I think similarly, I mean, here's a person who people have called him a loser. uh, People have called him depressed character, and but I always thought that he wasn't actually a loser. He was he had a different value scale. He had, in his office, for instance, he didn't want to behave in a certain way. He didn't want to interact with his peers in a certain way. He felt that there were other things which were more valuable than relationships were more. For instance, his relationship with his secretary, as you said, it's full of compassion. He worries, and he because she's being thrown out of the job, he actually ups and leaves himself. Now, if he had been a typical careerist, he would have said, no, why the hell should I leave?
mm,
So again, he had a different value scale to go by. Similarly, when you see him, and he's alienated from the way Delhi. Uh, I can't say Delhi today because this was written 20 years ago. So
mm,
Delhi 20 years ago, and today even more so.
mm,
The way stuff is happening, the way people are doing social networking, the way parties are full of people who actually don't matter, but they're there for the evening to make contacts, the falsehoods, the superficialness of city life. He suddenly finds it because in some ways, he belongs to a different time, and he's stuck there.
mm,
So, which is why it's easier for people. There may be people who forget large parts of their childhood. There
mm.
may be people who've gone into money and they forget when they were really on the road looking for a job, and there may be people who remember. So
Yeah.
he's one of those people. He's one of those people who has valued his relationship with the old man in the lift, for instance.
Mm,
That he says, I can't say this to him because we go back a long time.
mm.
We go back a long time is
Yeah.
something which you may value, you may not value at all. And that
Mm,
also with a lift boy who has
mm,
grown into an old man.
mm.
So, that's the kind of, he is a deeper character, I think, than simply being an angst-ridden
Yeah.
existentialist character.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so that's, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So uh, also sometimes, Navtej, mm, there is a mind of a person which just becomes a kind of a filter for nostalgia to pass through. Nostalgia about people, places, sounds, smells, sights. So, in what way do you think that the story, this novel, is also an exercise in nostalgia? Because sometimes, that is the overriding thing that comes through, and I'd like to talk you to talk a little bit more about that nostalgia of about people, about places, most of all. So, do you think that's very important?
I think now that I look back on it and I reread portions of the book 18 years after it came out, I think you're absolutely right. Nostalgia is a very prominent theme in the book. You know, and that's, I think, even the people, the various covers of the book, they tried to evoke, this is the old cover of the book. I don't know if it still exists anywhere. You know, it's full of mist and cloud, and this is the
Yeah,
first cover of the book,
yeah,
which is also very mist and cloud and mountains.
yeah,
So
yes,
nostalgia is a very strong theme in the book, because without nostalgia, the person cannot evoke the sounds, the sun, the light, the music, so back into the past. If you don't yearn for it, you won't remember it. So, now he evokes his childhood in granular detail. He evokes his first exposures to Bombay. He doesn't stay there long, but it's the kind of, the impact that the city has on him is so deep that, and then he keeps yearning in that sense for the past, not just for his lost love, but a time, a certain way of dealing with people, a certain languidness about places. The time when Connaught Place was different. The time when there were dining cars and trains.
yeah,
So, he has these things, and these would only be valuable, or would even come to a person's mind if he has place for nostalgia. Now, I don't think nostalgia is a negative feeling.
okay,
So
yeah,
I don't think
sure,
it's a negative feeling. I think it shouldn't be overdone. But I think it at the same time, it enriches you. It enriches a person, because if you have likes, you not necessarily go to the past for the sake of the past, but value the good things that were. If you like an old song, there's nothing to be ashamed of. You
no,
like
not
an
at all,
old song. So that's it. You're
yeah,
nostalgic about a certain singer, about a certain way of music, uh, about uh, a place. Since you mentioned places, Dehradun, Mussoorie of the
yeah,
60s was very different than the Dehradun, Mussoorie that you see today. And so, so all this, I think it's, yes, nostalgia is a major character in this book.
yeah. Yes, yes. No, it's richer for that.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the uses of a lot depends upon how that nostalgia is written about. And here is the role of language, because language, when it comes to into its poeticality, into its poetic nature, a dimension of language, we have so many dimensions of language. We have the ordinary language, we have cliches, we have ordinary descriptions, matter of fact, realistic kind of writing. But what really gives nostalgia its depth is the poeticality in the use of language, which really kind of evokes a time and place. So, would you like to read something which because in fact your book has been noticed for its poeticality of description, poeticality of language. So, if you could give us a little taste of that poetry.
Well, let me see if I can spot something straight off. Um, well, I think we could go anywhere, but um, Okay, let me just say it since when the train begins to reach Dehradun.
Mm,
Okay, I'll just
mm,
read half a page or something. Uh,
mm,
this train does not whistle. If it could, it would have whistled now, announcing its task ahead. As it leaves the station and begins its steep incline, this leaves Hardwar station. As it leaves the
mm,
station and begins its steep incline into the musty darkness of two long tunnels. I shut my eyes. I can feel the light on my face as we emerge. It calms me, begins to take away some of the poison that has built up in my veins. The light has changed again. It is now the light of the hills, cool and dappled, always smelling of winter. Laboriously, the train climbs in long upward sweeps, along hill faces with small temples, sudden bustling bazaars below, open courtyards, lazing cyclists, radios on shop counters blaring the song of the day. Soon, even without having to open my eyes, I know that we are out of the light and shade of the trees. We are through the hills, into the valley with its riverbeds, its fields of rice and sugarcane, and its lychee trees. Does one ever go back in time? Can one be a child again? Can I erase my past just by entering this childhood valley of mine and start afresh? These questions are useless because it is happening to me right now. So this is
mm.
just a short thing.
Yes,
Uh, I mean,
yes,
there could be so much more to read, but
yes.
yeah, this is just to give you
Mm,
a feel. Uh,
mm,
and yeah, let me read you the last couple of paragraphs of the book.
mm, mm,
When he comes out of his old school in Dehradun.
mm,
And outside the school, the air is still tangy and fresh, rising with the moist mystery of the green thickets that cover the nala behind the school. I can still feel the thorns from the bushes that used to catch at my sweater at the shoulder, the bramble that used to stick onto my winter worsted trousers, leaving little pins that had to be picked out one by one in the school bus going home. Tomorrow, like the old times, I will walk up the hills again to Mussoorie. I will take the bus to Rajpur till I reach the long uphill road with the few shops and houses, and then I will walk. I want to feel each step. I want my legs to ache. I want to stop and rest and every once in a while look back. Look back at all I have left behind, at the valley as it falls before me, gradually fading, gradually widening to my vision, until I can see the hint of the sun glinting on waters somewhere. Leave behind me the early sweeps of the track, wide enough to take the half trucks that work in the limestone mines, gouging out white wounds in the timeless rock. Rest for a while at Halfway House, if it is still there, with its few tables, tea, sweets, film posters, and children playing carom board. Climb into the freshness of the trees where there are thick along the abandoned railway track, past the school once meant for children of railway officers. Tire myself in the final stretch up the rock outcrops as my chest bursts, climbing into the bazaar with its smells of fresh milk bread and homemade milk chocolate, and feel the clouds as they dampen the warm skin on my neck. Then, after all these years, I will walk towards Rohini to see her smile, to feel the touch of her hand and share with her the view of the sunset over the ruins of the old brewery.
yes, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's anyone who has visited these places will know exactly what you mean. Will know exactly what you're trying to convey, and that opening up of the valley and its fields and its rivers and some of the drier river beds and the different places that Dehradun is known for, and the twinkling lights of Mussoorie
Yeah,
from the valley, and of course of the valley from Mussoorie,
that's right.
which they have their
Yes,
own
you have
magic.
spent time in
This
that place also. Mm.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I know exactly what you mean by the brambles being stuck to your woolen clothes while
Yes.
walking home from school,
Yes.
and all those, and the light filtering through the trees,
Yes.
and very many climbable trees in Dehradun that one can
Yes.
climb, run
Guavas and
through, climb.
lychees. Guavas and lychees. Yes. But
Exactly.
it's vanished,
So,
It's
yeah,
vanished.
yeah.
If you go to
Yes,
Dehradun today, you won't see much of that.
yes, it has to a great extent, but there are some places which the Friends of the Dune and
Yes.
various people are
Like
bent
that.
on preserving.
Yes.
So that certainly sort of evokes that time. But also, Nitesh, it's also the city descriptions, like the sordidness even of the Delhi of 20 years ago.
Mm.
You know, the hole in the wall tea shops and the grubbiness and all those things which make certain parts of a city so very, difficult to look at really
Yeah.
because of all that you see around you, and and Mumbai, in contrast, becoming, it gets a better deal because Mumbai is saved perhaps by the proximity of the sea, or perhaps by its very temperament of mixing. Um, what do you think separates these cities? What do you think is, because it's more difficult to write about ugly places than it is to write about beautiful places.
Yes.
But still, you have brought in a lot of observation there.
Yes. I walked these cities when I was very young, and
Mm,
I saw. I walked all over Delhi. Um,
mm,
uh, you know, uh, Doing freelance stories and all sorts of things which I used to. So I walked
mm,
Old Delhi. I walked the more crowded parts of Delhi, and I've had chai at railway stations and in little shops that you hole in the wall shops that you talked
mm,
about. So
mm,
I've taking Delhi buses and trudging around Delhi, I saw it very close. So I suppose that has all come into the book. Uh,
mm,
Bombay also, I think I only spent about 3 months there, uh,
mm,
but it takes half the book. But I
mm,
think those 3 months were very, very. I was very open to impressions. I was very, very. I was. It was very fertile fields that any impressions fell on, and they sort of
mm,
took hold. I was stuck by its. Uh, a few things about it. One was the sharp contrast, even sharper than Delhi, of the rich and poor. Uh,
yes.
and the what you see on the railway stations, what you see on the
Mm,
platforms, it's
mm,
miserable, or was even 20 years ago. So,
mm,
and that sort of comes into the book. A lot
mm,
comes, and then the personal experience, and then it's got a certain beauty. It's got a certain big city beauty.
mm,
You're right. It's partly the sea, but more than the sea, I found that um, it it had an indifference.
mm,
It hasn't. If nobody was bothered about who you were, what were
mm,
you doing, who was living next door, what was being made in their house for lunch. Uh,
mm,
you crossed each other on the staircase without knowing who the person is and without bothering about
mm,
it. I lived as a paying guest, so I saw the rich, the Parsi existence, the paying guest experience. And then I stayed,
mm.
I used to visit, in the book, the narrator stays in what is virtually a Bombay
Yes,
chawl, Sunshine
yes,
Terrace.
yes.
And, and I actually had friends who were living in a place like that.
Mm,
So I used to
mhm,
visit them. So all the descriptions of
mm,
Sunshine Terrace, I don't know if I can quickly pull
mm.
up a paragraph for you, but
Yes.
yeah, there it is. So it says, uh, I wonder if Sunshine Terrace is still there. It should have been pulled down years ago in the interests of safety and decency. But in those days, for Chuck and Ducky and I, and for the other 500 or so Bombayites who lived in its poky rooms on 6 floors around a huge hollow square, it was home. To reach room F16 on the 6th floor, we had to go up the creaking flight of termite-ridden wooden stairs, taking care not to step on the weak parts. Then past rooms full of noisy children, harried mothers, blaring televisions, radio jingles, and the smell of burnt cooking oil. Most of the excitement centered around the hollow square as the shouting, cheering children, some so small that they had to hold on to each other so as not to go over the railing, flung buckets on long ropes into the square.
Yes.
The buckets clanged and swung their way down to the filling team of elder brothers and sisters on the water tank below, who joyfully poured mugs of precious water into the buckets. Then the fathers, sweating in their vests, would be called out to pull up the buckets. Each time a bucket sloshed over the railing, the children shouted and did a little victory dance, sticking out their tongues at the group across the square. It was as good a form of recreation as any, and more innocent than most. So
Yes.
stuff like that, So
Yes.
I saw even Bombay pretty close,
Yes.
and it's gritty, and
Mm.
and it's beautiful. So I saw its
Mm.
freedom, its indifference,
Yes.
its
Yes.
nonchalance, its old world charm. The Wayside Inn restaurant that's described in
Mm.
the book,
Mm.
the Marine Drive walks, the paying
Mm.
guest life, the
Mm.
old flats in Colaba and Marine Drive. And I saw its
Mm.
sordidness of the Churchgate station at night, where the homeless
Mm.
come and sleep on the steps, and the policemen bully them and uh, throw them out. I saw the suburban trains parking in Bombay Central at night, and the drunks
Mm.
lurching out of that. So all that sort of is something which
Yeah.
makes a strong impression on a young
Yeah.
person, and I was barely
Right.
22 years old.
Mm. And in the book, of course, it's the location of that first romance.
That's
And that is what makes it more magical.
Yes, of course.
Because,
That's
yeah,
set
yeah,
in there, and in those, in
yes.
the cafes and the nice places, which are
Mm.
visualized as, there used to
Mm.
be an old restaurant called Flora Fountain called Wayside Inn, a very old
Yeah,
world with waiters in thin
yeah,
ties and table
yeah,
covers and table
yeah,
napkins.
yeah,
And there was the Jahangir Art Gallery,
yes.
which sort of, I think, creeps into the book somewhere. Uh,
Mm.
and there were Irani shops,
Mm.
which still exist.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah,
their chai and pao and, and the old jukeboxes in the Irani
mm.
shops. So that
Yeah,
sort of is a good setting for that romance.
yeah. And reminds me also of Rushdie's Bombay, Salman Rushdie's, chapters on Bombay in Midnight's Children,
Mm.
where, one chapter is titled Love in Bombay.
Mm.
But it's a very ironical and very different kind of, description.
Well,
And,
as they say, Rushdie
and
is Rushdie. So,
yes, yeah, yeah. So so that's wonderful, discovery and rediscovery of places. But amongst the people, the characters, how would you now think back on some of the women characters in this book? Um, of course, the center is the protagonist himself. We see everything from his point of view and his consciousness or his opinion about the women in his life. But do you have a slightly sort of a satirical view of some of the women with their satirical observation of their looks and their clothes and their mannerisms and their pets, for instance? There is that satire creeping in. That's
Well,
what.
I wouldn't like to own up to it as my view, because
No,
I'll be
no,
in serious
certainly not.
trouble.
No, no,
I'll
no.
be in serious trouble. But yes, the protagonist, I think he has a kind of um, a split view, in that
Mm,
sense that he has this view of a person he loved, and
mm,
nothing she did or can
mm,
do can ever have any wrong,
mm,
you know. Uh,
mm.
and he may even be opening himself to disappointment. Uh,
Yes,
yes, because
yes.
he's idealized her so long, he's idealized their
Mm,
brief romance uh,
mm,
so much that when he actually
mm.
meets her, we don't know what he will find.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but on this other hand, he's had a very bitter experience uh,
Mm,
in his personal life with his
mm,
wife, and
mm,
I think that has colored his immediate reactions.
mm,
He's bitter, he's cynical, uh,
mm.
but
Yes.
I must say that he's not bitter and cynical only about women. Uh,
Mm,
for instance, he does criticize the sort of what he calls, the uh, kind of women who work for child relief agencies. And this is
mm,
not my words, this is the protagonist. Uh,
mm,
and he basically classifies people who are, uh, uh, into the kind of development sector, a big, and
mm,
typifies them into their clothes, etc., men and women. uh,
mm,
just not development sector. The kind of party Delhi that he sees,
mm,
which he feels through is senses a kind of sense of falseness, and that
mm,
also because of and he largely bases on the kind of clothes they wear. He said the men they
mm.
wear bundis and silk
Yeah.
kurtas and carry
Khadi, khadi.
khadi silk
Yes.
and
Yeah,
bundis and carry Mont
yeah,
Blancs in their pocket. He hates the
yeah,
Mont Blanc pen, for instance. He says,
yeah,
I have
yeah.
a parka and I'm going to stick to that. And he says,
Mm,
Mont Blancs and khadi made you sound rich and committed at the same time. So,
mm-hmm.
he's being cynical and satirical about this, and
Yeah.
similarly, he talks of women also. But,
Mm,
he picks on their dress, he picks on the accoutrement of uh,
mm,
social life, and uh, and and then he goes back to saying that, all this is, he's just bitter. He's just had a terrible experience. So it's
mm,
not that uh, he's particularly picking on one gender, I would say.
mm, mm. Yeah, it just occurred to me that our Prime Minister has a Mont Blanc pen. He writes with that. Anyway, so right. So you know, with this book having traversed these 2 decades, and then you have written a lot besides that, and revisiting it. A book has, of course, a book has many lives, and one hopes it may continue to be read and readers go back to it again and again, because there is a lot that we still haven't talked about that we could talk about. And but how do you look back on this firstborn? Because everyone says that that the first book has a special place in the heart of an author, and so how do you look back on this book, and how do you sort of trace its life as so many years down the line?
Well, I am very partial to the book, which is not
Mm,
surprising,
mm,
but in the sense that it is a book which did
mm,
very well when it came out, and
mm,
somehow it has, it sort of keeps ticking away, and keeps, being picked up by readers every once in a while. And I think it was an essential book for me, because if I had not written this book, I don't think I would have been able to write the books that I wrote after it.
I see.
There was all this in my head, somewhere in my heart, that it all had to come out. Because every time I started to write something else, these things would come in the way, and crowd me and say, no, what about us?
Yeah.
So then finally I sat down and I wrote it. I think the first draft I finished in something like 2001. And I had this whole lump of a file with a huge draft and lots of characters, many more than you still see, that you see in the present book. And then when it went to the publishers and to the editor, he had we met up. He's a good friend, and Ravi Singh, he was with Penguin at that time, and Ravi sat and we had a glass of beer. We were at Berkeley, and he said, "Yeah, there's a book in there, but why do you need this character? Why do you need all this? Why do you need this?" And on the flight back to Washington, D.C., where I was posted at that time, I took a green pen and I cut out half the book, including the heroine. So I cut out the heroine who existed in the book at that time. And she became a different kind of person in this book. And then I rewrote the book the next 6-8 months. And that's how it happened. And I finally got, a lot of memories, a lot of episodes, a lot of people, in many ways, on the page. And then in that way, in terms of the creative process, it allowed me to move on to things which were perhaps not so close to me. And I could look at it just as a book.
Right.
I could look at it just as a book. I mean, the second book was an assignment book, the Book of Nanak, which was a pure, straightforward book. Then, I could go on to my other books. But this was a book which was coming out, as Fitzgerald said in regard to something else. He says, I pulled it out of the pit of my stomach. So this is that kind of a book, which you pull it out from deep within you. And that you bring out very deep emotions, very deep impressions, which perhaps is difficult to replicate in any other book.
That's where the poetry comes from then.
That's where the poetry comes from.
Yes, that's very interesting. That's fascinating how much gets left out also in the process of writing. And how many characters, how many things disappear, and one has to live with that as well, with not being able to include everything. I mean, that is also one of the writer's, you could say torments in a way, or challenges, whichever way you kind of think of it.
Because ultimately you have to think of the reader.
Yes.
You can't. I mean, you can. One James Joyce can pull off one Ulysses, but everybody can't pull out books which go all over the place. There has to be a certain linearity at some stage.
That's right.
And certain logical. The reader expects a certain amount of logic and clarity, and so you can't crowd it beyond a point.
Right. Yes, I'm sure. And there's a lot of suggestion also, suggestive power, which hints at things which were not written, but that it can hint at those. And so that then you, I suppose, as a writer, you would then reconcile with giving up some things,
The famous thing is you have to kill your darlings.
Yes.
So
Yes, I
your
know.
darlings, a lot
Yeah.
of your
Yeah.
darlings.
That's right. So
There was
creator
one
as well
particular
as,
paragraph which I kept fighting for in the end, till the end,
yes,
with the editor.
I see.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he said, "No, this just has to go. It makes no sense here." I said, "But it's so
Yes.
nice." He said, "Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's well, these things happen, you know. I've learned
Yes.
now to I've learned to live with this now. So
Yes. At the end of the day, the editor is also just one person, one reader.
yeah,
And other readers may feel differently. But then, as you say, one has to put a stop to it somewhere
yeah,
and then, put it into shape. And then be a creator as well as a destroyer simultaneously, you know.
yeah.
And but that's what makes it a very, very absorbing and delightful and very, very sort of, life sustaining kind of work, you know. And would you like to say something more about your journey as a writer and how you?
It's been a great journey. I, you know, I wanted to be a writer ever along, and
Mm.
I came up the hard way, as they say. I was not one of those people who could produce a huge novel at 21 and have it
Oh,
on the bestseller
uh,
lists. So
mm,
I learned the craft of writing. I learned
mm,
journalism. I progressed through book reviews to short
mm,
stories to uh, to feature articles,
mm.
and
Yeah.
and and then I reached ultimately the novel. So I you know and then I've been able to experiment with history,
Mm,
travel, with
mm,
translations. So it's been a very fulfilling journey so far, and
mm.
I still have a book or two in me.
Yeah, I was thinking, in the nature of what we see these days, would you have a sequel to We Were Not Lovers? Have you ever thought of a sequel?
I wonder if it can sustain a sequel, but I'm in the process of finalizing
Mm,
another novel. So after that,
mm,
maybe I will go back to
mhm,
something which is more freewheeling than the work
mhm.
that I've done.
I
This was a freewheeling book. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So that's wonderful, a kind of circularity that you come back to the same place. The aim of all exploring is to come back
Come home.
home and see, yes, and see the place for the first time. So that, that is the nature of the journey.
Yeah.
Um, Train journeys are linear, but then they are circular also, as you've shown in the book,
Yeah.
because while you are there, you also go backwards and forwards in your mind. So that in our literature, in our films, there's a great importance of this train journey. Our Bombay film is full of evocative train journeys and evocation of train journeys, and so many songs and books that are,
Well,
the
it's
locus of
yeah,
romance. Yeah,
it is the best. It is the really civilized
yeah,
way to travel.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
like you can
True.
get a good trade. I
Yes.
think you should take a
Huh.
good trade.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's quite
Yeah.
unmatched in its
Yes.
in its
Yes.
in its charm.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I've
Uh,
and it's
yeah.
sort of it works. It works in
Yes.
terms of
Yes.
stories, films, and
Yes.
books. So
True.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
There's time for reflection. There's
yeah,
time for reflection. There's time for seeing the world from the window,
yeah.
and looking at the world. So that is what makes it so magical. So uh,
I think
I think,
we
yeah.
probably crossed the time. So
Yes, yeah. So it is, I mean, we could still talk about quite a few things, but I think it probably, gives the people who will be listening a good idea of your beautiful novel, and they would go back to it, they would read it again, or discover it for the first time if they haven't read it, and it would be a great experience for them, I think. So I think I would like to thank you for being So open and so kind to read some sections from the book. And so thank you very much, and it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Pushpinder. Thank you for taking the trouble to go so deep into the book. I
Thank you.
thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To thank Mr. Navtej Sarna sir and Professor Pushpinder Syal ma'am for joining us today. We wish we get to hear you both again and be equally enlightened as we are all today. And for my dear massive audience, I'm sure that after witnessing the conversation, you all are taking home an enriched version of yourself just as I will. Thank you for joining us today. I'll see you again. This is Aditi Putra signing off.
Welcome to Rise Sony Group, a vision beyond.